Hello, beautiful soul. Thank you so much for choosing to spend your time and your energy with me today. So, since the very last time that I spoke about one of my latest trauma responses, and I kind of talked in the video about my process of how I linked it back to my previous relationship and also my family dynamic, and how I processed my emotions around that and how I got myself out of the trauma response. I went onto YouTube because I was curious and I had a little look to see whether there were people out there who made videos about their trauma responses and about how they managed them. I could only find videos who were created by professionals about this topic. Like, obviously it's amazing that these professionals have put such useful resources out there, but I also felt that it was very important that there were videos of people who spoke about their own personal experiences with trauma responses and spoke about how they've managed them, just so people can feel less alone and less isolated in what they're experiencing, and also have someone to relate to in their own journey with trauma responses and everything. I just decided that it needed to be out there, so that is why I'm making this video today. Also, I just wanted to point out that you'll notice that throughout this video, I will smile or laugh sometimes. Some people will find this inappropriate considering the topic that I am discussing in this video, and I know that a lot of people who know me personally will already know this, but I tend to do this a lot as a coping mechanism. When I'm stressed, when I'm talking about something confronting, I will try to ease the tension within myself by smiling or laughing. So I guess first of all, I thought it would be important to kind of list what my trauma is, just so you can get an idea of what my experiences are, and also so that anyone who's had similar experiences may be able to start making connections between what they've experienced and what kind of triggers they may have. So, major trigger warning, I am going to be talking about abuse. So in my first relationship, I experienced verbal, emotional, social, financial, technology. I'll put the right name for it down below. So as I look this term up, I was shocked and surprised to find that I have experienced every single one of these. And also when I've spoken to counselors and they've asked me to identify different types of abuse I've experienced, the more I talk, the more I find that there's more and more abuse that I've experienced without recognizing that there was a label for what it was that I was experiencing. I experienced gaslighting, manipulation. I can't remember the right term for it, but I used to get told what I could and couldn't wear. I've experienced sexual abuse as well. I experienced stalking. I think those are the predominant ones. If I can think of any more, I will list them up here. So I've experienced trauma responses for about the last year and a half, and my ex-boyfriend and I separated 3.5 years ago. When I first started having trauma responses, I would call 1-800-RESPECT, which is the 24-hour hotline for domestic violence in Australia. That's free to use. One of the first counsellors I spoke to explained to me that with trauma responses, they can fall into two categories. So you can either have a fight or flight response, or you can go into freeze mode. Most of my trauma responses are more in the freeze mode category, but I have had trauma responses that are more fight or flight. When I first started domestic violence counselling, one of the activities, my homework that my counsellor gave me, was to make a list. It's a little bit hard to see, but basically my list looks like this. So I was asked to fill out 4 different categories. So the first column is trigger, so what was happening just before the trauma response happened. The second category is feelings, thoughts, physical sensations that get triggered. The third category is the intensity of the trauma response, and the fourth category is the coping strategy that you implemented after the trauma response started happening. So I can categorize most of my trauma responses within 3 main categories. So One of the main ones I get is feeling unsafe, and that is more towards the fight or flight mode category. So in these instances, I will get triggered by a situation where I do not feel safe in my environment, and I will start, getting very nervous. I really start to feel that I need to get myself out of that situation because I don't feel safe emotionally, sometimes even physically, whether it is actually the case or whether it is imagined, whether it's just reminding me of a situation that I was in the past with my ex-boyfriend where I did not feel safe. In that instance, I try to get myself out of that situation as soon as I physically possibly can. The second category of my trauma responses is I will start to go numb. This is probably my most common trauma response. So if I feel like I've been triggered, I'm always really hyper aware of whether I start to feel any numbness within my hands, within my legs. Those are normally the first two things that start to feel numb, and then eventually numbness throughout my whole body. If the trigger and the trauma response is intense enough, I know that's a really weird phrasing to use. After the numbness, I generally start to feel heavy, and if it's very intense, my body will even start to shut down. There was even a time where I kind of went through all three categories. So I was living in a house share where one of the housemates had bipolar, and I realized how much of a volatile environment it could be. I had never personally had anything happen with the housemate, but another one of my housemates had. There was an incident where two of them were kind of in the middle of an argument. I'd never seen them argue before, but there was an instant where I was in my room and I just suddenly felt very unsafe. And that's when I started feeling panicky, kind of like I really needed to get myself out of there because I just wasn't feeling safe in my environment. This then led to me feeling heavy and very tired, as though I just wanted to curl up into a ball on my bed and sleep. But I knew that was just a reaction from me not feeling safe and shutting down. So I made steps to get myself out of there. I called a good friend to see if I could stay at her house. One of the most intense trauma responses I've had when I was living at that house, actually, I was driving my car on the way back home, and there was this slight thought in my head about the fact that I didn't feel safe there. In my previous relationships, there were a lot of instances where I didn't feel safe being at home, so I would spend as much time outside as I possibly could. And it was just that feeling of going home to a place where I perceived as unsafe. As I was driving home, I just started to feel very strange, and I can't quite put everything into words, but basically I just started feeling kind of numb, and I was there, but I also wasn't there, and I was going into disassociation. I almost felt as though I was perceiving what I was experiencing from a bird's eye view or something of the sort. My body didn't feel okay. It felt kind of heavy and just weird, so I stopped driving. It didn't feel right for me to move or to speak either. It almost felt like I was physically incapable. I ended up calling my friend who has experienced disassociation in the past, and I eventually called a counselor when I got home. It was safe for me to drive. Sorry, as I started to edit the video, because hyperfocus life, so it kind of started getting dark, so I've just got some fluorescent lighting on so that you can still see me. These are some of the main things that I implement when I have a trauma response. So first of all, I will begin to observe what is happening in my body. So am I having a flight or fight response? Am I having a freeze response? Initially, I want to make sure that I'm meeting my fundamental need of feeling safe. So whatever it is that I need to do, I will do so. A lot of the time that will look like getting myself out of the situation where I am feeling unsafe. I'll make sure that my basic needs of hunger and tiredness are met. Normally for me, because I go into the freeze response of going numb or heavy, sometimes if the trauma response is intense, I will also begin to feel tired. That's part of my shutting down process too. I don't know what it's called exactly, but when you call 1-800-RESPECT, they will teach you this method to get yourself out of disassociation, which is What's happening for me when I start to go numb, when I start to feel heavy, when I begin to shut down? To get yourself out of that situation, you use this mindfulness practice where you go through the 5 steps. I know I've touched on it very briefly in my previous video where I discussed my trauma response, but basically it's 5 things you can see. To make it a little bit more challenging, I guess, for yourself, it's good to pick a shape. So it could be 5 things within this room that are circular. When you're describing these things out loud to yourself or to another person, if that helps you, it's best to go into as many details as possible. That is going to help you to get out of that disassociative state. The next step is to identify 4 things that you can hear in your environment. If you're in a very quiet place, you can even make sounds on your own. I know that sounds strange, but you gotta do what you gotta do, girl or boy, whichever, because abuse does not discriminate. And men's experiences in abuse are just as valid as a female's. Third one is 3 things that you can touch, and you want to describe what the texture feels like. Is it hot? Is it cold? Etc. The second one is 2 things that you can smell. The last one is something you can taste. Obviously, this is not a test, so if you're in an environment where you can't complete it, that's okay. It's okay if you can't taste anything. It's okay if you can't smell 2 different things. The whole point of the exercise is to go into detail about what is around you so that you can bring yourself back into the present moment and away from the traumatic event that you're kind of reliving. If I do this exercise and I'm still not feeling 100%, and sometimes, especially depending on the intensity of the trauma response, it can take a while for you to feel 100% okay. There have been times where I've needed to wait like half an hour, an hour and a half before I felt completely like I had come back into the room and I felt like myself again. In some instances, I will call up 1-800-RESPECT if you've specifically called them during or after a trauma response so they can help you out with the process of it. The best thing to do would be to request whoever picks up the phone to forward you on to a specialist counselor. This person is specifically equipped to handle these situations. My recommendation is also just to do things that make you feel comfortable and safe. So if that means snuggling up in a blanket, having some ice cream, getting a hug from a loved one. Also, I've had moments where I've had a trauma response or I feel like I might have a trauma response and I've called up a close friend so we can talk about it, and that has helped too. I hope that some part of this video has been helpful for you, and I hope that it is also helpful for people who don't necessarily experience trauma responses but have a loved one who they would love to support in the process of navigating their way through trauma responses, because I'm telling you, it can be really scary sometimes, and it can be tiring to work through the same trauma responses again and again within varying intensities. What I am grateful for though is that every time I have a trauma response, sometimes they kind of fall into the same category of what it is that it's triggering. Other times new triggers come up. So you're just kind of building this puzzle of like, where are the moments where I felt unloved or unsafe, and what are the ways that I can allow myself to feel loved within this moment in the best way that I can. So as tiring and as challenging as it can be sometimes, I'm really, really grateful that my body is showing me all the ways that I can pour love back into myself, because I've had moments in my life where I didn't feel loved or safe by someone who was meant to allow me to feel safe and allow me to feel very loved. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate you so much. Thank you for doing what you can in order to love yourself and to nourish yourself in all the ways that you deserve. If you would like any more videos about this topic, if you'd like me to go more in depth about my trauma responses, my experiences with them, anything at all, please let me know and I'm more than happy to make another one. Sending you so much love and all the healing and nourishment that you may need at this time, and I will talk to you in a jiffy. Bye.